While unsolved mysteries are more exciting to watch, the ones that do get solved are more satisfying. Families get the justice they deserve so they can finally put their loved ones to rest. From the famous murdering family that haunted their community for 3 generations, to a wife spilling her guts to the FBI about her murderous husband, here are 3 cases solved that will give you satisfaction. Mansfield Family Murders. As dawn broke on October 28, 2020, investigators in Hernando County, Florida began searching a cluttered 6-acre property belonging to the Mansfield family. They brought in heavy equipment and a team of forensic anthropologists to sift through the soil. After several hours, they announced they had found human remains. While the Mansfield's neighbors were shocked and saddened, many were not surprised. The heavily wooded, junk-strewn property had been the final resting place of at least 4 other women whose bodies had been discovered in the spring of 1981. They, as well as another woman in California, had been the victims of Billy Mansfield Jr., who is now in prison serving a life sentence for their murders. However, many of the Mansfield's neighbors had long suspected that there were more women buried on the family property. However, the horrific story of the woman who suffered and died at the hands of the Mansfield men did not start with Billy or Gary, but with their father, William Mansfield Sr. By the time of Billy's arrest in 1981, his father, William, was himself already in prison. He had a rap sheet going back decades and spanning multiple states, beginning in Michigan in 1946. William was 21 at the time and had been indicted for the attempted rape of a 13-year-old girl. However, at trial, the jury didn't believe the girl, and William was acquitted of the charges. A year later, however, he was convicted of armed robbery and sentenced to 5 to 20 years. He was paroled after 4. Only a few years after getting out, he was sent back to prison for violating the terms of his parole because he had been arrested on rape charges in Reno, Nevada. It wasn't until 1980 that the world outside their isolated compound would begin to learn just how horrific the Mansfield family truly was. That year, 56-year-old William pled no contest to 4 of 40 counts related to sexually assaulting dozens of young girls, including one whom he had assaulted repeatedly from the time she was 9 months old. William was sentenced to 30 years for these crimes. But before the small Florida community could process the shock of what William had done, his sons would be arrested for crimes far worse. Billy very quickly began following in his father's dark footsteps. He was 18 when he was arrested in Michigan and charged with kidnapping 2 women and forcing them to perform immoral acts on him. However, the jury did not believe that both young women could have been forced to perform the immoral acts just by one man. Billy, like his father, was acquitted. Mansfield Jr. had already racked up a laundry list of crimes, including battery, kidnapping, and sexual assault, when he met 30-year-old Renee Saling at a tavern in California on December 6, 1980. The two left together, and the following morning, officers found Saling's body in a drainage ditch, riddled with bullet holes. Mansfield Jr. was arrested on a first-degree murder charge days later. After a mistrial and an attempt prison escape, he was convicted of raping and strangling Saling. The publicity from the California case led an anonymous tipster to call Hernando authorities and ask them to search Mansfield Jr.'s home for Sandra Graham, a 21-year-old Tampa woman who went missing on April 17, 1980. The first skeleton buried on the grounds was unearthed the next day, but it only was identified by experts as a white woman in her 20s, and still remains a Jane Doe. A week later, another skeleton was discovered, this time identified as 15-year-old Elaine Ziegler, a tourist from Ohio who disappeared from a nearby campground on New Year's Eve in 1975. On April 3rd, authorities pulled from the ground what they now know was 16-year-old Fillingham's body. And 4 days later, the tipster's predictions came true when Sandra Graham's remains were finally recovered. Mansfield Jr. eventually pleaded guilty to killing all 4 of the women found at his home, and also pleaded guilty to the attempted sexual battery of a 5th woman. He is serving a life sentence in California. Cara Nichols. Cara Nichols, who attempted to spark her modeling career at age 19, told her friends she would be traveling from Colorado Springs to Denver for a photo shoot in 2012 on October 9th. Minutes later, a dark sedan pulled away from the building, and the roommates assumed it was her ride. Over the next 2 days, Cara's brother, who lived nearby, attempted to call and send text messages to her, but she never picked up her phone. Cara Nancy Nichols never returned home and has not been heard from since. Inside the room she rented, Cara left most of her personal belongings, including her purse, identification, clothes, makeup, laptop, and $300 in cash. Her phone records, bank account, and social media have shown no activity since she vanished. The last activity on her phone was text messages sent on the night of her disappearance at 11:45 p.m. Her cell phone, which has not been found, last pinged to cellular towers north of her home in the direction of Denver. In 2016, 4 years after her disappearance, the family got new tips about their daughter. Those tips had led Nichols' family to believe their daughter had died. In February of this year, a discovery was made after re-interviewing a witness, where new critical information came to light, leading investigators to search property on Burgess Road. A search warrant was obtained on February 7, 2022, and investigators of the El Paso County Sheriff's Office and the FBI were deployed to the 9600 block of Burgess Road, where female human remains were discovered. The match came out to be positive when compared to Cara Nichols. 46-year-old Joel Hollendorfer, who resides on the property where the remains were recovered, was arrested and charged with second-degree murder in Cara's case. He's also facing a felony charge of tampering with evidence. In late January 2022, Hollendorfer's wife told the FBI that Joel confessed to strangling Cara during an encounter and that he then buried her body on his parents' property. She also said she believes his parents knew about the murder and had been covering for him. The Hollendorfer property was originally searched back in October of 2014, when detectives used mobile phone pings to figure out where Nichols had been the night she disappeared. Cadaver dogs were brought in, and authorities found an area that looked like a shallow grave. However, for unknown reasons, the area wasn't excavated until this year. On February 9, 2022, Hollendorfer's bond was increased from $50,000 to $1 million, with the judge citing more than a dozen failure to appear charges and a criminal history going back to the mid-1990s. Isabel Sanchez. Isabel Sanchez Bernal came from Mexico City to Mammoth Lakes in 2002 and worked as a housekeeper in Mammoth Lakes. Several months later, her boyfriend Diego Hernandez Antonia also arrived in Mammoth Lakes, where they stayed with extended family. In the fall of 2002, Diego and Isabel went for a walk, however, only Diego returned. When questioned later by family members, Diego said that Isabel had left the area with someone else and provided a forged note from Isabel telling her extended family not to look for her. On May 25, 2003, a hiker near the Shady Rest campground in Mammoth Lakes National Forest in California discovered a shallow grave with skeletal remains scattered around the area. Investigators estimated the victim had been dead for 6 to 9 months. Forensic examination of these remains revealed 2 penetrations that were concluded to be consistent with knife wounds. Therefore, the death was classified as a homicide. A limited amount of information was gleaned from the remains, namely that the remains belonged to a woman that was likely 30 to 40 years old, and that the woman likely had indigenous ancestry from southern Mexico. The victim's information was entered into NCIC and the VICAB National Database. Unfortunately, there were few leads to work from, and the case eventually went cold. In 2020, forensic-grade genome sequencing was used to build a comprehensive genealogical profile to generate new leads. At this point, the female homicide victim was at last known to be 30-year-old Isabel Sanchez Bernal. With the information provided by Isabel's family, the defendant, Diego Hernandez Antonia, was arrested on August 13, 2021, for the murder of Isabel. Initially, Diego Hernandez Antonia stated that he had no idea who Isabel was. With further questioning, his story changed, and he admitted knowing Isabel, but said that they separated soon after going out on a walk in the fall of 2002. Finally, he told investigators that when he and Isabel went for a walk, they had climbed the hills over Shady Rest Park to build a rope swing, that Isabel had fallen off the rope swing and hit her head, and that he buried her body in a panic. This was contrary to much of the evidence that had been gathered. On April 5, 2022, the Mono County Superior Court sentenced Diego Hernandez Antonia to a term of 11 years in state prison for the voluntary manslaughter of Isabel Sanchez Bernal, closing one of the longest cold cases in Mono County history. What kind of punishment do you think these criminals deserve? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe for your regular dose of whodunits. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Until then, stay safe and don't get any crazy ideas.